after you finish filing, you are going to sand your work. And so this is when you really learn the lesson of what, if you don't put scratches into your metal, you don't have to take scratches out of your metal. So you try and treat it very nicely, all right? But, so I think actually because we're mostly using new metal, it's not, shouldn't be terrible, okay? That said, when you see a shine on metal, and I might have touched on this before, right? What we're really seeing is reflected light coming back to our eye, right? There's our eye. But very often, if there is a scratch, what we see is the light comes down and it bounces around there. And often when you're looking at, if you like glint your piece of metal in the light, you will see your scratch glow. It'll like have you'll see the light in there, okay? So, but it doesn't come back. So when there's a lot of scratches, the light is diffused and we see it as a dull matte finish. Matte finish means not shiny, really, okay? So that said, we need to get down to the bottom of that and make it smooth again. So there's a few different ways you can do that. We'll be using abrasive. So again, we're taking particles to scratch it and remove the metal until we get at the bottom of the scratch, okay? Another way that you can do it is that you can take a polished hammered surface, kind of like, and then if this was our hammer head, right, we hammer that and it'll compress the scratch out of the metal, okay? So that's why we want to keep our hammers in the best shape possible. So if you see a hammer that's got a really shiny surface on it, don't use that to beat on another steel tool, because you'll beat it up, all right? And then lastly, you can do what is called burnishing. You can hard rub your metal and it will close the scratches. Again, it kind of pushes the scratches closed. So, but it's not with a hammer, it's with hard rubbing. Okay, so basically when I start sanding, I kind of assess my scratches, and if it looks like I don't have a lot of scratches in there, I'm going to start with my middle sandpaper. So my middle sandpaper, I'm going to try and draw this backwards. Oh, okay. Let's see if I can do my 4. Okay. Okay. We have 320, 400, and 600. What do you think those numbers represent?
The size of the sandpaper?
Correct. Particles per square inch. Okay. So our 320 is rougher than our 600. And sandpapers go up to about 1500. Okay. But for the most part, once we go to our polishing, we only need to take it to about 600. Okay. So that said, I keep the sandpaper over by the fuse box and the drill press. It's in black drawers and they're labeled. And for the most part, the sandpapers are in the correct drawer. But don't rely on a piece, like if I had this here, don't assume that it is a 400 sandpaper unless it is marked. So I ask you, if you do rip off a piece of sandpaper, do everybody a favor and put a marking on it, because you can see that this 400 looks like this 400, which kind of looks like this 400 kind of looks like the 320. So depending on the manufacturer, it's easy to get them confused, okay? So, because and that's important because you do not want to sand backwards. Okay, so don't trust a piece of sandpaper that's not marked. All right, so where'd my little piece of metal go? Here we are. Okay, so there's some couple of things in that. So I'm gonna address my scratches, and I'm gonna start with 400 just to see how it goes. And I'm gonna work wet. So I usually just get a little bit of water here in a lid or a dish, but you don't have to work with it underwater. And I'm gonna work in one direction. You have to work wet for 3 reasons. One, let's see if you can see it. I'm starting to develop a sanding paste with the grit of my sandpaper. Okay, that sanding paste is working for you. Those extra dislodged grits are helping you. Okay. The other reason is that it keeps your paper from getting clogged with sanding dust. So it works better that way also. Third most important reason is that it keeps the metal dust out of the air. Like already, we're not a really super clean room, but if we worked dry, we would have a ton more metal dust in the room. And metal is not good to breathe. Okay, so I ask you to, if I see you working dry, I will ask you to get water to work wet. Okay, it's for the health of everybody. Okay, so you're going to work in one direction. And that is important so that you can track your scratches. So if I have a scratch in my metal, and let's say I have a scratch here and a scratch here, if I were to go in different directions, I would not be able to track when that scratch comes out. Okay? But if I adopt one direction, they'll kind of give you a satin finish. Eventually, that scratch will fade away, but I can tell when the scratch underneath the grain of what I'm sanding. So I'm seeing kind of a satin finish, but I'm looking under that sanding, okay, to see when that scratch fades off, okay? So that's really hard to kind of learn to see. So I'm going to introduce you to this tool right here. This is a jeweler's loop, and you will see that almost every jeweler has it at their jewelry bench, okay? So you could either put it right here and kind of look down on it, and that's the kind of super works it, or you can kind of bring it way up here. But you should be able to see that there is nothing crossing that grain. Okay? Come on closer. Okay. So once I get to, and if I see that I have really deep scratches that I'm not getting anywhere with, I would probably go back to 320 and maybe spot sand those deep scratches. Okay? All right. So then I would have to go back to 400, and hopefully that doesn't take too much time. Okay, so then once I get that all done, I'm going to go the opposite direction with 600. And at first, you're going to see a squarish pattern in your metal. Okay? Eventually, that will fade off, and you will only see kind of the satin 600 grain. Okay? Again, you have to kind of be really systematic how you come at it. Okay? Because when you go to buffing, it will unveil really how your sanding went. Okay? And it's kind of one of those things, the proof is in the pudding. Okay? So it's just there until it's gone. Okay, so you'll get through that, and then you're gonna sand both sides. So over at the sink, I keep little pieces of styrofoam. Especially as I'm finishing, I like to work on a piece of styrofoam so I'm not grinding in grit on the underneath, right? Because there might be a little piece of metal right here, and if I'm working on top of that, you could be putting scratches in while you're taking scratches out, okay? So, all right, so there's that, and then let me give you a couple of tips in that. You can, and I don't care how you do this, you can do this with your fingertips. There's your, and so there's my piece of sandpaper, there's my piece of metal, there's my piece of styrofoam. Okay. If I'm going back and forth here, what's going to happen is that I'm probably going to wear my edges of my metal, and it's going to end up looking soft and pillowy. Okay? That's fine. It's a great look. I like soft and pillowy. But maybe you don't want soft and pillowy. Okay? So if you want to have kind of clean, flat, you would take your sandpaper and you would put it kind of over a block, still get a little water on it, and work it something like that. Okay, so here's my sanding block, here's my sandpaper around it, here's my piece of metal, okay? And so because the block will keep it from conforming around the edges. So you'll end up with a much flatter, kind of truer surface, okay? Again, I don't care which way you go with it, okay? So after that, that's pretty much the tips for sanding. You know, the work is probably more in the sanding, and then when you get to the buffing, if you've done it well, it's like that. It goes really easy. But otherwise, you'll see that squarish little pattern of incomplete sanding. Okay, so I have the magnifying glasses for us, and work wet. And perseverance is really the main thing, okay?